you check the children?
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Greetings and salutations, Fright fans, and bienvenidos to the horror show. Jaime and Fuego back here for another solo review for a film that I actually went out to the theater to see because, you know, right around Arizona State graduation, it was like one of the few genre bits in theaters that I had yet to see, and the trailers were pretty vague, so I was really not knowing what to expect, and it actually did not turn out to be specifically what I expected with my preconceptions and all. And I'm talking Hurry Up Tomorrow, which stars The Weeknd. You've also got Jenna Ortega in there, Barry Keoghan, I always forget how to properly pronounce that Irishman's name. Scotch or Irish? Scotch-Irish? I can't remember. Awesome actor. Saltburn, various other things. But I went into this thinking that it was going to be The Weeknd. Essentially, I know he was on that show, The Idol, which was with Johnny Depp's daughter, showing off all her goodies and stuff. And, you know, since I didn't watch that, I knew he was playing a completely different character on that. And so I thought this was going to be another, like, he's playing a musician, you know, but it's not gonna, like, be him. And it's him, you know? I mean, they keep it a little bit vague because there's only one instance in the film where Jenna Ortega's character is getting ready to go to his concert, and she looks on her phone and sees, you know, The Weeknd, and, you know, she's, like, looking at almost like a concert flyer or something, but yet nobody refers to him as that in the film. Nobody's like, hey, The Weeknd, you know, I know that's a moniker for him, you know, not his real name and everything, but this actually ties in directly with his newest album, apparently, that came out in January of this year, and from what I was reading, explores some of the same themes. I'm not sure if it's, you know, just the cliches of, you know, the tortured artist that's, you know, regretful of some mistakes they make, but, you know, that is most definitely themes within this. But yeah, I guess he's probably playing a little more fictionalized version of himself. But yeah, I was expecting him to be doing something a little bit different as opposed to this being an actual full-on tie-in with his music and, you know, playing a version of himself, I would guess. And so if you want to talk about overall thoughts, I actually liked the first third of this movie, where it was exploring him and going through all the rigors of touring and how he's expected to be, like, on all the time. And you see him at the beginning of the film, like, trying to get psyched up looking into the mirror, and then he goes and he hits the weights a little bit to get the blood pumping, and then jumps on stage. And they obviously did some you know, cool concert filming in a big arena, so you got just the full scale of the stardom and everything like that. And then you start to get just these little hints about the fact that he had a relationship that went sour, and he's listening to these old voicemails from this girl, and she refuses to talk to him, return his phone calls. Barry Keoghan actually plays his seemingly manager, but also, as is mentioned a little bit later in the film, like a bestest, like kind of like his best friend, because of the fact that, you know, they both left their homes to, you know, kind of pursue stardom. And he's like, I was the one who just, you know, left and, you know, came with you and believed in you and have stood by pushing your talents and just the scale of your abilities and everything like that. So it is kind of a symbiotic thing where his success is, you know, predicated on The Weeknd's success, but you can kind of tell that he's not just the full-on, like, manipulative manager. The fact that they did come up as close friends initially kind of plays a part, and you get some context and insight about that. And then Jenna Ortega is this, like, tortured super fan. I'm gonna give a spoiler that just preface it right now because it's in the trailer, and it's one of the only ones that I am going to give here, guys. But this does turn into a little bit of a misery situation, as you see in the trailer with, you know, I'm your #1 fan, so on and so forth. But she's got this whole torture thing going on herself. She has, you know, long-standing issues with her mother, and I'm not going to go into some of the things she does early in the film that really orchestrate this, because that, I think, was when the film was its strongest. You know, before she gets to his concert, the first third of the movie is seeing just the pain and the tortured nature of the artist that is The Weeknd, and then she comes to one of his shows and they get involved without getting into too many specifics or anything of that nature. And that's when the film decides all of a sudden to veer. And I guess I've kind of given overall thoughts about the fact that this wasn't necessarily for me. If I'm gonna give something like Prince's Purple Rain, where he's kind of playing himself, but and incorporating a lot of his music and stuff like that into it, that would be like the really, really good version of this sort of concept. You're playing kind of an exaggerated version of yourself, incorporating all of your own music. But in the case of Prince's Purple Rain, it was when he was not yet at the level of stardom that he had attained by the time he made Purple Rain. But still, if I'm going to think of a film where you're playing an exaggerated version of yourself, that's one that I think does it significantly better than this one. Because, the narrative kind of falls apart in the second and the third act, in my opinion, because it tries to become, without spoiling too much, almost like a psychedelic experience with some of the visuals they employ. The Weeknd kind of getting lost in his own head and things of that nature, kind of these dreamy, trippy sort of sequences that we have. And then it turns into a cat and mouse discussion of his art, and I really, really did not like the third act of this film. That was where it completely fell apart after getting a little experimental in the middle. As far as performances go, because we always like to, overall thoughts, a little bit of the story. Now, performances go, I didn't see The Idol, so I don't know if he showcased some significant abilities on that show. I think he was like a cult leader or something on it. But he's actually fairly solid in this. I mean, nothing that's going to wow you or anything like that, but when he was leaning heavily into the tortured artist and just the depression over regret and things like that, the facial expressions, the nuance of just his body language and that emotion, it came off as genuine. And I'm not a big fan of his music, despite being a punk metalhead kind of guy, but he's got a couple tracks that I would classify as bangerang. And some of the new music, I have to talk about the music for this, obviously. The more synth-driven, almost like score sort of stuff that we have in certain patches of the flick, I actually really dug, and the guy's got a hell of a voice, so I'm not here to disparage him to any fans that may be coming across this. It did feel, in a lot of ways, though, because I did a very short Rapido Fuego review of this right after I saw it, and this is like a more expanded review here, because I tend to do that where I'll give brief thoughts almost out of the theater on my personals, and then over here in the horror show delve into things a little bit deeper. But in some ways it did feel like a long-form music video that was trying to be a narrative feature film when it didn't quite have enough to sustain, and it's not like a super long flick or anything like that. I want to say it's like around 90-100 minutes, something of that nature. But that's a constructive criticism of it, and since it is kind of partial marketing with his new album, I would say big fans of his music will probably find a lot more enjoyment in this than somebody like me, who I guess is like, yeah, I'm casual, kind of not fan per se, but somebody who's like, yeah, I respect that guy, he's quite talented, and props to the ambitiousness for trying to do something in this. As far as the other two main leads that we get in this movie, I'm not a Jenna Ortega fan, and I don't think at this point I'm gonna be convinced to ever be one. I don't like despise her or anything like that, but her version of like snark and stuff, whether it's Wednesday or whether it's her work with the far more talented Melissa Barrera that I want to say played her older sister in Scream 5 and 6. I don't know, she's just never done it for me, man. And there's obviously a lot of people on the Jenna Ortega hype train. I guess it didn't help that she's playing kind of a selfish, annoying character in this. She has a few moments of just, I guess, bearing her soul to the Weeknd once they finally meet and they're sharing their scars, so to speak. But yeah, I don't know, she just annoyed me in this movie, as she has in various other projects. Barry Keoghan is good when we actually do get him, but he is much more a strictly supporting player. But he does have a few moments where you can tell that he does genuinely care about the Weeknd, beyond just, hey, you're my cash cow, get back out on stage and it is kind of a dueling dynamic, though, where, you know, as I mentioned earlier in this review, you are dependent on one another, right? In these sort of, you know, successful symbiotic stardom scenarios. And but so yeah, when he does get some time on there, he's a little bit of an asshole. He's got a bit of an ego because he has that association with the stardom of his friend. But yeah, you can tell that there are still like threads of care and conviction for him as well, especially as he sees him struggling. Besides the three of them, I can't even remember there's anyone else with speaking parts. You know, you see The Weeknd and Jenna Ortega's characters like going around town after they, you know, meet each other at his concert and whatever, and then, yeah, as you see in the trailer, they end up in a hotel room, whatever. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else really has speaking parts in this beyond this trio of characters. Filmmaking wise, let's see. You know, this is from the same director who did It Comes at Night, and I know a lot of people, despite being stylistically solid in my estimation, they really did not like that film. I want to say it was with Joel Kinnaman, maybe, but you know, a lot of people didn't like that. No, I don't think it's Joel Kinnaman. It's Joel someone else, so don't take me to the cleaners on that comment. But that film, a lot of people were pissed off because it was kind of a bait and switch scenario. Everyone thought it was going to be one thing, and then when it turned out not to be that, they were just mad, as opposed to appreciating you know, the cinematography and the people he worked with to craft that film, and just kind of the uneasiness of the way it was shot. This has some interesting visual flourishes, especially some of the camera work, just spinning over city skyscapes and things of that nature. So it is relatively well made, and even those trippy kind of sequences that I mentioned, you know, they do give a little bit of a sense of dread. But, you know, at the end of the day, as I said, it felt more like a long-form music video than an actual narrative feature film. But, you know, it's not the fault of the director, in my estimation. You know, don't really get a lot of gore in this or anything of that nature to speak of, but you know, you can tell it is more than likely being filmed in Canada, and some of the like snowy landscapes that we see, some like older abandoned homes in this neighborhood where we first meet Jenna Ortega's character. It's well shot, you know, and you know, it's a nice looking film for a good chunk of it until we get to this really grounded and kind of boring third act, especially in the first act, where you're just feeling the urgency and the energy of this life that The Weeknd lives, and you know, going from party to party, and just this frenetic, almost just uneasiness to the proceedings. That stuff is very effectively put together by our director here. And I also touched on the music. I mean, with him being a musician, it's a showcase of his new stuff, right? And so yeah, not absolutely my cup of tea, but definitely, especially with some of the synth-driven bits, something that I could respect. So as a whole, it's a mixed bag for me. But as I mentioned earlier, Hurry Up Tomorrow, especially for like diehard fans of The Weeknd, they will probably find a lot more to this than somebody like me who went in quite blindly, and I'm just like, oh, it's a thriller, looks interesting enough, even though it's kind of retreading some things with you know, the whole misery mention and whatnot, as far as obsessive and toxic fandom and things of that nature. But yeah, mixed bag for me, but for big fans of The Weeknd and his music, I think you might actually find a little more in this to be appreciative about. And so that is my thoughts, everybody. A little shorter of a review than I've done for some of the other stuff today, but for the film Hurry Up Tomorrow, that I believe it is still in a few theaters as of the Sunday that I'm shooting this review, but if it's not on digital already, I would imagine it'll be there, end up on a streaming service at some particular point. And didn't make a lot at the box office at all the opening weekend when I saw it. So, you know, perhaps it will find more of an audience once it is available at home. So, I extend a grande gracias, everybody. I've been Jaime and Fuego. I'm on all the socials. If you just, you know, Jaime and Fuego, look for me there. But have you seen this movie? If you have, give some comments below. Do you think that this should have been a full feature, or could it have been kind of truncated down to a short, and as opposed to getting a theatrical release, maybe, I don't know, just put on his YouTube or something like that? I wonder if with the marketing that was presumably associated with this, and the fact that it's opening weekend, I can't even remember if it eclipsed $1 million. Now, they didn't spend a lot to make it, but you know, would it have been better to be shortened and to have just been put online or something like that. Or am I gonna be hit up with the hardcore fans of the weekend? Probably not. I don't know if they're gonna necessarily track this review down, because I didn't see a lot of prominent reviewers even giving any credence to this. But that's my thoughts, guys. And so yeah, like, share, subscribe if you are just happening upon this review. You know the drill here. But once more, gracias everybody. Thank you so very much. And until next time and the next review, Fright fans, remember, stay scared.